Good morning. Welcome to River Community Church. My name is Sam. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm so excited you're here. I know it's raining outside. Thanks for braving the rain. You are going to be so happy you came here, I think, because I've got this gift for you this morning, and I cannot wait to give it to you. I'm really excited. Like Aaron said, I've been kind of giddy all week about it. I read this chapter, and I can't believe how good it is and how amazing it is and how freeing it is. You are going to leave here feeling really good. So I'm excited about that. I hope you're excited too. But before I get to that, a couple quick things. If you're new this morning or if you haven't been here for a while, glad you're here. What you need to know is that we're in a series right now called Serious Hope. It's a study through the book of Hebrews, and we're looking through this book of Hebrews and seeing just how amazing this hope in Jesus really is. It's outstanding. I'm excited to get into it this morning with chapter 4. But that song you just heard was Working for the Weekend. Does anybody know who it was by? All right, great. I don't even have to say it. Awesome. So that's a nice little 80s song for you guys to get you excited for the morning. But it's fun because I think that a lot of us are used to thinking that at some point in our life, that whole weekend thing, it used to be a thing, didn't it? Right? Like you'd get to the weekend and you'd sleep in, you'd relax a little bit, you'd enjoy yourself, you maybe read the paper, not change out of your PJs till 11 or whatever it is, maybe do a couple of jobs, whatever, you got to do stuff around the house, but it'd be relaxed, it'd be easy. It was a weekend, it was awesome. But at some point in recent history, at least for a lot of us, I feel like, that weekend thing, it stopped being a thing. It stopped it completely. Because today you get to the weekend and you get into it and suddenly there's just so much going on. There's like kids sports happening at like year 2. Like 2-year-olds are doing kids sports. It's mind-blowing. If you're not in it, you're behind, I'm telling you. But then you start with that and then there's like the house stuff you have to get done. I have a question for you. Be honest, raise your hand high, and hold it up there until I tell you otherwise. How many of you have done a DIY project at home? Yes? If you don't know what that is, it's a do-it-yourself project. Now keep them up, keep them up. How many of you regret doing a DIY project? Okay, I thought that was the case. You think it's a good idea, and then you do it, and it takes longer, it's harder, and it's messier, and it's never done. It's awesome. So that's what happens on the weekend, right? You got your DIY project. And then in addition to that, there's all the people that you couldn't see during the week, you haven't seen in ages, and they're in town, and so you want to go and see them and keep those relationships up. This happens all the time. You're trying to keep up those acquaintances and friendships. It's good stuff, but it keeps you busy. And then in addition to that, the last thing is maybe it's none of those things, but it's probably work, right? Work is happening, and so on the weekend, you're responding to messages on your phone all weekend because something's going wrong at work, and you're the one that has to put the fire out, or maybe there's just so much work to be done that you're doing overtime all week. You're doing that just to make sure everything gets done, and you feel like you could use the extra money, so you're literally working all weekend, not working for the weekend. And so I feel like this is the reality. Like, here we are. It's tough. We're busy, we're tired, we're all feeling this, and it seems like the weekend's not there, and so we're looking for this rest. We want it so badly. And so when you read the very first line of Hebrews verse 1, chapter 4, verse 1, the very first line of it, you get excited, because it says this: God's promise of entering his rest still stands. And that's an awesome thing to read, because there's a rest there. But then you keep reading, and you get a little nervous. It says, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. Now that's a little tougher part, and we'll get to that. But that first part, man, that first part sounds so good, because couldn't we all just use a little rest in our lives? It'd be awesome. And the rest that's talked about in Hebrews, it's multifold, it's multi-layered. There's a lot that goes into it. It's both heavenly rest that we will experience into eternity with God, and that's an amazing thing, but it's also rest that starts today. It starts right now. We don't have to wait to experience it. And we'll get into that in a little bit as well. It's this amazing thing. I'm excited for that. But then there's that second half of that verse, right? The thought of missing out. And we're all excited about the idea of rest. The thought of missing out is a little not so exciting. It's not so much. And I think all of us are searching for that rest, so it's kind of nerve-wracking. So we're going to get to the rest that's happening now in a moment. We're going to get to that nervous part in a moment. But before we get to any of that, let's just take a moment, okay? Let's just take a moment, a nice little moment, and think about God's rest for a second, just so we can get a better appreciation for what we're talking about this morning. And we'll start off with what I feel like is the feeling of that rest. I feel like it's got to look like this, right? A full body massage chair, okay? Like that sounds like about what it would feel like. You sit in that and it's going and you're feeling good, right? Question, has anybody seen those at the mall, right? You walk at the mall when they're there, yes? How many of you have sat in one at the mall? You're amazing, because I would never do that, because I'd be drooling and people would be walking by thinking you're kind of looking a little weird. You're so relaxed at the mall. That's kind of uncomfortable. I would love one in my house, just not at the mall. But then, so you get into the massage chair, and then in addition to that, you add to that a nice little glass of cool, ice cold lemonade that you're sipping on your back deck with your massage chair. Like, this is a good picture, right? This is sounding really good. There you're sitting on your deck, but it's not just your deck, it's a deck with a view like this, with amazing water coming in. It's beautiful, and you can't just see it, you can hear it too. You can add the sound. Waves coming in, waves going out, taking all of the worries away. It's beautiful, it sounds so good. I just linger here for a moment. Okay, that's enough of that. I feel like if I'm to picture what God's rest looks like, it looks a little bit like this, but it also feels like, I don't know, your vacation from your vacation that everybody's talking about. Has anybody ever said that before? You need a vacation from your vacation? Like you get to the end of it and you're like, ooh, I'm tired, right? Because you go wherever you're going to go. You have some fun, you maybe rest a little bit, you finally get relaxed, and then you have to go home. So you load up the kids and all the stuff, and you head in the car or on the airplane, you head back, and the kids are saying like 13 million times, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And then you finally get home, and you unpack everything, and you collapse on the couch, and you're exhausted, and you feel like, and you say, I need a vacation from my vacation. When I think about God's rest, that's kind of what I picture. A vacation from your vacation, because you've just rested, but now it's time to really sink in to deep rest. Overwhelming, complete, deep rest. And we've got this kind of picture going on of the rest and what we maybe would experience with what we'd see and what we'd maybe have, like a glass of lemonade and whatnot, but there's more that goes into rest than that. And so I'm going to invite you for just this moment to imagine with me what you would be feeling in this moment as well. You'd be feeling maybe the idea that there's no expectations coming your way. Nobody's expecting anything from you. Nobody's calling you on your phone. Nobody's texting you. Your phone's not even by you. It's like in a closet somewhere 300 miles away. You don't have to worry about it. No one's calling your name, asking you to help them with something. No, the kids are resting right there with you. They don't need anything from you. You're just able to sit and relax. There's nothing that needs to be done. There's no stuff that needs fixing in the house. There's no worries about money. There's no pressure about the week coming up. You're just there, relaxing, resting, letting all that stuff go away. Just pure, unabated freedom. Can you imagine it? A little bit. It's there. It's kind of hard, isn't it? Can you imagine stripping those things away for this little tiny bit of time to sink into rest? Doesn't that sound so good? Now, before you all fall asleep and like really get into this, I'm going to take away this background so you don't really relax, and we're going to talk about something. Because here's the thing. Here's the reality. God promises us this rest. He promises it to us. This heavenly rest. It's been his pattern and his plan since the beginning of the world. And Hebrews talks about it. In verse 4, it says, we know it is ready because of the place in the scriptures where it mentions the seventh day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. From the beginning of time, God had rest built in. And it continues in Hebrews in verses 9 through 10, it says, so there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God, for all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. It's foundational. This is what it is. There are rest built in because that's who God is. It's in his character. And these are just a couple of references here, right? There's a couple of references to this heavenly rest that we will experience, and it's in Hebrews, but if you study through it, and study through the scriptures in the Bible, you'll see this amazing picture of what heaven will be like someday, what rest will feel like someday. But at the very beginning, when God created everything, at the end of creating everything, he set aside this time to rest. Rest is foundational. We need it. We crave it. And it's something that gets repeated and looked to over and over and over again throughout the Bible. But there's a problem. There's a real problem here. The problem is that God's people tend to choose not to enter that rest. They don't choose not to enter it. They do other things, they make mistakes, they do these things that prevent them from entering the rest that God has for them, which is why it says in Hebrews 4, verses 6 through 7, so God's rest is there for people to enter. But those who first heard this good news failed to enter because they disobeyed God. So God set another time for entering his rest, and that time is today. If you were here last weekend, you heard the word today a bunch, right? Because that's this common theme that happens throughout the book of Hebrews. He's always talking about today, not tomorrow. It's always today. So Hebrews, it's saying that there's this new time. It's a final time to enter God's rest. And it's today, not tomorrow, not next week, not when you pass away. It's now, it's today. And that sounds really good, doesn't it? But before we get to that, before we really understand how good that is, we have to do something first. And that first thing is the hard part. Remember I said there was maybe the not so good thing in the second half of that verse? Well, we're going to talk about that now. Because Hebrews has this very full and difficult tension in it, in this chapter. You feel tense as you're reading through it. It's heavy, it's hard to read. It's this pattern that emerges over the first 5 verses. It's a promise of the rest met with a warning of why you might not enter it. It's over and over and over again, verse after verse. In verse 1, we just read it. It's God's promise of entering his rest still stands. And there's a warning. Still, we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. And then again in verse 2, for this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them. Promise, met with a warning, but it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God, warning us to continue to believe in God and follow and listen. Promise, for only we who believe can enter his rest. If you believe, that's a great promise. But the warning then is, as for the others, God said, in my anger I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest, even though this rest has been ready since he made the world. And then one final promise and warning in verses 4 through 5. It says this, we know it is ready because of the place in the scriptures where it mentions the seventh day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. It's foundational. But the warning comes again. But in the other passage, God said, they will never enter my rest. It's tense. It's uncomfortable. It's like Hebrews is trying to tell us something, kind of beating us over the head with it, over and over and over again. And what's crazy is this tension just continues to build as you go further and further into this chapter. It climaxes in verses 11 through 13. In these verses, there is such tension you could literally cut it with a knife. It's intense. So we're going to read it here and we're going to see what it says. It says, so let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God as the people of Israel did, we will fall. For the word of God is alive and powerful. It is sharper than the sharpest two-edged sword, cutting between soul and spirit, between joint and marrow. It exposes our innermost thoughts and desires. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable. Imagine with me that you are, as would have been typical in the day, sitting in a house with a bunch of other people who are believers and followers of Jesus, and this letter had just come, and they open the letter up, and they're reading it out loud, as they would have done over and over again, so that these scriptures would become known, and so they'd hear these words, and you're sitting there with everybody, and you can just feel the tension, right? Promise and warning, promise and warning, promise and warning. Big old warning. God is like a two-edged sword that cuts between bone and marrow, between spirit and soul. He knows everything. You're exposed before him. God knows me. I'm exposed. He sees everything. He knows about that thing last week. Am I disqualified? And you'd be sitting there, and everybody would be sitting there holding their breath, wondering what's going to come next. And you can just imagine the silence in that moment. You could have heard the smallest pin drop. There you sit, hoping against hope that something good is coming next, something real, something worth hearing. If this is the warning, how can we be sure that we will enter his rest? Thank God for what comes next, because it is the most wonderful and filling and amazing thing. In these next verses that we'll get to in a second, it's this breath of hope that comes in. But as you're sitting there and you're hearing those words, it's like when you've been working for the weekend, right? And then you get to the weekend and you start to think through what you have that's coming up over the course of the next couple of days. And you feel the mounting pressure of everything that's about to happen and that you have to get done around the house and the places you have to get the kids to and the bills that you have to get. And you start to sit there thinking about this weekend that's about to come, and you get a little quiet. And maybe it even gets to the point where you think to yourself, man, I can't wait until Monday so I can go back to work and slow down again. Some of us are living those lives, not all of us, but some of us sure are. And you hold your breath like those people in that house were holding their breath, hoping you'll get enough rest to make it through. But let's be honest. Let's be very real with ourselves here. That's not much of a hope, is it? Hoping you'll just get enough rest to make it through. It's not much of a hope. It's more wishful thinking or rolling of the dice than any other kind of serious hope. So when you're sitting there hoping that the next words are something you want to hear, it is such a rush of serious hope when you hear these next words in Hebrews. It says, "So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most." That's something good to hear. That's how we know we'll enter God's rest. If we have Jesus, we have serious hope. Because we have Jesus, because we can go to him, because we have access to him, we can enter that rest. We can be sure of it, that we will certainly enter his rest. Because we have Jesus, when God sees us, like the way he actually looks at us, he sees us for who we are, who we really are. And who you really are, if you follow Jesus, is a person who is saved and being made good and right and pure and perfect by Jesus. That's who you are. You're not all of your mistakes anymore. You are who Jesus is making you to be. That's serious hope. It's a guarantee of a real and good rest and eternity with God. It's certain for you. You can expect it. You know how you work for the weekend, you look forward to it, helps you get there? Like do the work that you need to. It's a good thing that gets you through. Well, you can expect at the end that you will find rest. It's certain. It helps. But the thing about that is it gets better than that. And that's amazing to think, like you have heavenly rest coming someday. But that's not it. It actually gets better than that. The reality is that you can start having that rest now and soon. Today. But to get to that part, we have to understand something very, very important. And that's this. And I think this might blow your minds. Work is not the enemy of rest. Work is not the enemy of rest. Believe it or not, it's actually the case. Work is actually the friend of rest. Yes, sometimes work prevents you from resting. Sometimes there's seasons where you have to do extra work and it's hard and you're going through that time and that happens. But work is not the enemy of rest. Sometimes you have to make adjustments so you have time to rest, but it's not the enemy of rest. The enemy of rest is anxiety. The enemy of rest is anxiety. God calls us to do good work. Sometimes you don't like the work you have to do, but when you do the work, you're still tired at the end of the day and helps you rest. But work, God calls us to do good work, and when you're doing good work and you know God's in it, then you can actually experience that, and it's a good thing. You like doing it. It's a good thing for you. But God calls us to do that work and then rest from that work without the fear and anxiety that comes from fear of the future or worry about the past, or a fear that you're not going to live up to whatever standard he has for you, or whatever standard somebody has for you. Jesus alleviates that fear. He's the antidote to it, and that can start today. When Jesus died on the cross, Jesus accomplished this ultimate, and this is the big fancy church word here that maybe you've heard before but not really know what it means, the ultimate atonement. Like back in the day, before Jesus, the people would sacrifice these animals for the sake of paying for their sins so they could be made right with God. Well, Jesus is this perfect, complete sacrifice that atones for everything, makes you right with God, makes it so that God sees you as this good person that's growing more and more like his son and is perfect and has this perfect relationships with him. That's how he sees you. So when we hope in Jesus, when we place our trust in him, tons of things begin to change in our lives. I'm going to talk about two of those things. And we've already started to talk about one of them, but the first one is this, is you can expect heavenly rest. Because of Jesus, you can expect heavenly rest. Your fear of never finding that rest that you're looking for can be gone because of Jesus' atoning sacrificial gift, you've been reconciled. You've been made right with God. You just have to accept the gift that's waiting for you. It's there. And maybe you haven't taken that yet, and you have an opportunity to do that in a moment. But the second thing, and this is the thing that I think is going to make the most difference for you this morning, it's the gift that I've been so excited to give you all week, is this. You can start finding rest today. You don't have to wait. Today. Not like metaphorically today. Like today, okay? Now. You can start finding that rest because Jesus can relieve your anxiety, your worry, and fear today. Now, what you need to know is this. All of us, we walk around every day with a particular standard in our heads. We have this standard, this thing that we're trying to live up to. And there are a lot of people that contribute to it. I don't know who's contributing to yours, but maybe it's your boss. You go to work on Monday and your boss says, hey, you'd have to make this X number of widgets before this deadline, and so you spend your time worrying about whether or not you're going to be able to get that accomplished or not. So you fear and you're anxious about it, and you go home and you worry about it, hoping that you'll be able to make that deadline. Trying to live up to that standard. Or maybe it's not your boss, maybe it's your group of friends. You have this group of friends that you like to spend time with, and there's just a certain set of expectations that are there, right? You have this certain set of expectations. You got to wear certain things, you got to say certain things, you got to be at certain events, you got to help out when there's help needed, and there's this certain set of pressures that go along with this group of people, and you feel like you have to live up to that standard. So you're trying super hard to do it, and it's exhausting. You're just trying to be good enough. And so there's that standard, or maybe it's not your friends, maybe it's this voice that you've had rattling in your head since you were born. Maybe it's like from your parents or from a teacher that you had. And they said one time or multiple times that when you will be successful when you X. When you do this one thing. When you get to this particular place. And so that's been rattling around your head this whole time, and you're just trying so hard to be successful. And that's the standard, and you're just trying so hard to get to it, but it's so hard, and you're never quite there, never quite enough. Or maybe it's none of those things, maybe it's you. Maybe you have a standard for yourself that you've continued to think is what you have to be at, and you never live up to your own standard for yourself. It stinks. It is no fun because you're constantly disappointed in yourself. Whatever it is, whatever that standard is that swirls in your head that keeps you up at night and makes rest so difficult to grab a hold of, whatever that standard is, you can let it go. You can give it up. You can cast it aside. You can get rid of it. You can, really. You absolutely can. You can fundamentally change your motivation in life. And it will change your life in drastic ways. It's what Jesus means when he says this. It's in Matthew 11. It says, "Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." That standard that he's talking about, that yoke that he's talking about, that's the standard. People and teachers have different standards. Jesus's is light. Jesus's is better. His standard is a better, more attainable standard. It's a standard that, on one side, exemplifies and works towards this really hard work, this really sincere work that you do with your life. And on the other side, it meets that same kind of work with this amazing, far-reaching, complete, and whole grace that you do not have to earn. You have purpose in life, work you're supposed to accomplish, and it's good, and you like to do it. And you have grace that says, if you work towards that, awesome. If you mess up and don't go get what you think you're supposed to do, that's okay. I still love you. You're still accepted. You have important work and grace meeting right there together. And when you can arrive at the place where you realize that Jesus' standard matters a ton more than whoever's voice is in your head, then you can suddenly let go of all of that anxiety and fear and worry, and it's gone. What's more, you'll actually be a better employee because you're going to do your work how you think Jesus would want you to do your work, and your boss will probably be impressed. You'll be a better friend because you're not trying to earn their love or earn their respect or earn their friendship. You're just loving them how Jesus would love you. Be a better spouse, be better everything in a lot of ways. And you'll start remembering how to rest. Because Jesus says, do your best to follow my ways, and as you do that, you're made right. Trust me and follow me, and you're made right. You're enough, you're loved, you're forgiven. You'll be satisfied, you're secure, you're understood, you'll find peace. You'll live up to my standard. Because my yoke is light. My standard is attainable. Change your motivation. That's my challenge for you this morning. Change your motivation fundamentally. Don't do your job. Don't do your household chores. Don't run around with the kids or whatever else that you have to do for anybody else. Don't do any of it for anyone else. Do it for Jesus. Do it how Jesus would want you to do it. And I guarantee you what will fundamentally change, and you think this is small, this is huge. What will fundamentally change for you is there's this group of things that you think is really important. It's going to be a lot less important. And there's this other group of things that you kind of know is important, but you haven't given much attention, and it's going to suddenly get a lot more of your attention. And your life will fundamentally change. The last words in chapter 4 say this. It says, "So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most." You can constantly remind yourself that by trusting Jesus with your past, he's forgiven it. By trusting him with your present, he'll direct it for you. By trusting him with your future, he secured it. It's secure. You can boldly claim the rest that's yours because of Jesus. You can do it. You don't need anyone else's permission except God's, and God's given you the permission, so take it. Take it. Don't let any worry or any person steal the rest that's yours starting today. And honestly, I think this is the absolute best gift I could have given you today. I've been so excited to give it to you. I hope that you understand just how much of a difference this can make for you in your life. Like, it's foundational. Because you're doing it for Jesus and not for anybody else, it changes the way you feel about things. It changes the standard you feel like you're supposed to do, and it changes the idea that you're not living up to it. And maybe you're here this morning and you've just never understood that. You've been doing everything in your life for everyone else, and it's led you to do some maybe poor things, some things that haven't been so good for you, and you feel like you're just not living up to standards. Maybe today you could say, I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to take his standard, not everybody else's. And that would be a tremendously freeing thing for you. It's July 4th weekend. We're celebrating the freedom we have in this country, which is utterly amazing. But in doing so, we also know that the freedom we get from Jesus, whatever country you're in, is so much more than that. So you could take that today for the first time. Or maybe you took that at some point in your life, and you've just let all these other voices start crowding what standard you think is important. Reclaim it. Reclaim the standard that matters. And let everything else, all the anxiety that comes along with it, melt away. And you might have to reclaim that day after day after day after day, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. The better it gets. I'm going to close with a prayer, and that prayer will be in two parts. The first part is, if you haven't taken that ever and begun following Jesus and having him lead your life, I want to give you a chance to do that. If you have done that, but you've lived a life filled with anxiety and worry, and it's prevented you from ever finding the rest that God gives you right now, I'm going to ask God that we could reclaim that rest today. And you can pray that right along with me. Would you pray with me? Dear God, thank you that you love us so much that you sent your Son to do the most amazing thing in freeing us from all the pressures and standards of everybody else and everything else. This morning, God, some of us might be here and never have said to you that they want to follow you and experience the freedom that comes with it. The freedom from everybody else's standards and simply following you and then being able to attain the standard that you set for us. Trusting in you. So if there's somebody here that's in that place that needs to and wants to begin following you, I pray that they'd say these words with me, that they'd say, God, thank you for loving me. Thank you that you forgive me. Please forgive me for trying to please everybody else and everything else and doing all these things that are sin and keep me from you. Thank you for forgiving me. Now help me to follow you with my life and begin experiencing the rest and the good work and the good things you have for me. Help me to follow you with my life and claim what's mine because of who you are. And in addition, God, for those of us who have said a prayer like that in the past, we simply ask that we would stop letting the world's voices, the other standards, get the best of us and ring in our head too loudly. That we would be able to reclaim your standard and follow your ways instead and be freed up so that we can reclaim that rest you have for us and that freedom you have for us. And that we would do it day in and day out. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.